A delayed game will inevitably be a good game. Welcome to the Gamey Daddy channel. Today we're going to be talking about the Cyberpunk 2077 delay. And this is something that many people probably saw coming, and I don't know for different reasons why. But if you go back and look at the way the game was delayed, initially the rumors that came along with this said there were some issues with one of the platforms. And then there was another delay, and now finally this one that's actually being spanned for about 21 more days. Now, this is, in my opinion, one of those things that highlights the complexity of game development, and my goal in this video is to basically talk about this and showcase it and kind of, in a sense, juxtapose it with a game that I played that's been a very troubled game since release. And I think some of my suspicions are somewhat highlighted with all of this that's going on with Cyberpunk 2077. Now, the anticipation for this game is really high. In fact, a lot of people have claimed or proclaimed that many other games are going to die once Cyberpunk 2077, or if Cyberpunk 2077 ever comes out. And if you read the notification that was given by the studio heads at CD Projekt Red, they talked about the complexities and they talked about the issues that have basically stopped them from, being able to release this game on the scheduled date. And they cited that the difficulty with this game was during the middle of this game being developed, it became a next generation game. The game actually had its teaser about 5 or so years ago, and the game has been in development for about 7 years. And in the middle of that, next generation consoles started to come out, and then optimizations would have probably taken place because developers usually get dev kits way earlier than everybody else so that they can start developing and optimizing. And then at the same time, the promise of the game being available even to the current gen as I make this video, which will be next gen basically in a matter of 2 weeks, all of these complexities have basically, stormed and piled up upon the studio. Now, not even that, they also have to deal with PC and Stadia, which if you even talk about the differences in the consoles, perhaps maybe 4 or 5 different consoles. I mean, you're talking Xbox Series S, Xbox Series X, Xbox One X, the old Xbox One, and then you have the PlayStation 4 Pro and the PlayStation 4 itself. Then you also have Stadia, and then you also have PC. When you look at all these complexities, it seems like there's just a wide array, but then when you go deeper, you find out that there's even much more of a wider array if you look at even maybe say PC. Now, PC development, if you look at the time that Cyberpunk 2077 was rumored and teased, and even till today, PC components have exploded and blown up because there's been an increase in the rise of more people migrating towards PC. And this has basically spanned from different generations of hardware within the PC genre. So you've had the old school architecture that AMD and Nvidia have been dropping, and even Intel and Nvidia have been dropping when it comes to processors. When you look at this wide array as well too, fine, it may be less computing and less difficulty trying to do all of this, but then think about everything including the COVID incidents. I think this is a valid reason for them to make sure that they get this game right. And I think one of the biggest challenges too is developing a game is a very difficult concept. I've been doing a lot of research into what it takes to make a game, what it takes for systems to interact, and I think some of the more complex games will even face much more troubles even when they are dropped on the market. I think Cyberpunk 2077 is one of the most ambitious games out there, but really it hasn't really done anything that seems too complex from, say, The Division 2, which is a game that I've played for so many years. And for a long time, The Division suffered from a whole lot of things, and so the developers decided to move to a different framework and change the game entirely. And one thing that I've always said is The Division seems like a game that is way ahead of its time. And I didn't necessarily think about it from the perspective that I'm about to share with you, but in the sense of maybe the systems, the concept and all of that stuff. I just felt the game had a futuristic outlook that no other game was doing. And just until recently, I started investigating also the nature of hardware and the toll that it takes on video games in terms of development and the limits it puts on developers. And from my findings, what I found out was the PlayStation 4 console is an outdated hardware system. And this is not the fault of, say, Sony. I think at the time that they were, developing this console or planning it, they had already, stated and, set their mind on the architecture that they wanted to use. But by 2013, when the console started to, get its final shaping and drop on the market, the computing and all the technological infrastructure basically developed and exploded and advanced significantly in just a very short period of time. And so Sony basically just kept selling the console and developers kept on to adapt to it. But at the same time, it was an inferior console. Somebody commented on one of my videos on the Division 2 and said, for the longest time, my PlayStation 4, and my Division 2 were just not seeing eye to eye. I went ahead and upgraded to a solid state drive and basically 90% of my bugs are gone. Now, I'm not saying people with the PlayStation 4 should go and upgrade to a solid state drive. That's not what I'm saying. What I'm saying is, I remember there was a conversation between the developers when they said something about streaming the game and how the game interacts on some of the consoles, and the solid state drive was something that would help. They were heavily mocked for something like this, and rightly so, because they should not have released the game without the game being optimized for the PlayStation 4. And this is the challenge that CD Projekt Red is going through, but they are taking the time painstakingly to make sure that they do not make that same error, especially with the expectations that the gaming community has. And so as Ubisoft or whoever made the decision that said, let's ship it out the door like that and we'll just keep tweaking the PlayStation platform, I think that was a poor decision for them to make. Now, if you also think about the Xbox community, yeah, sure, Xbox does have some of its own issues in regard to the consoles as well, but you can't say that Microsoft actually had outdated consoles, because their console refreshes actually gave more strength to the consoles. So in my private conversations with different, gamers around the Division 2 landscape, I have found that with the Xbox, there have been, in my experience anyways, less of these issues propping up. But on the PlayStation 4, texture issues, lighting issues, all these things that are very performance heavy when you actually factor it into a video game, have been what has plagued the PlayStation version of this game. And it's more painful because it appears that PlayStation does have a significant chunk of the player base. I mean, the other day I looked up, some of the numbers of people who had bought the game, who had logged on to the game on the Division 2, and basically on the PlayStation 4 platform, because that's one of the only places you're able to get player numbers. It was actually very apparent that PlayStation made up at least a good chunk of the the entire player base. I mean, I was very surprised that the sales on the PlayStation 4 console alone was very significant. I mean, it was closing up to about 50% of the initial total sales that was reported after a few months when the game released. And that told me that this game was going to be in a lot of trouble with its publicity, because they had not taken the time to pay attention to get this done. Nonetheless, I still put myself in a position and say, what decision would I have made at that point? And this is a leadership decision, and I think the decision that the studio heads at CD Projekt Red are making is the right decision, and should have been the decision that the developing leadership at Massive should have made. And I think this is why CD Projekt Red will continue to remain the top of the line development company in the industry. I'm hoping that they're able to resolve for the issue, and they're not going to bring out a buggy game, because there is a huge install base. Regardless of whatever I say that the PlayStation 4 console might be an inferior piece of hardware, there is still a huge player base that is very, very apt to get that, to get that game. So for their own sake and their own benefit, there are 10 million plus PlayStation 4 consoles. This is the number that I've researched that are sitting there, and a good number of them will be happy to play Cyberpunk 2077. And this is without the need for getting a PlayStation 5. So Cyberpunk is a very critical and important game that's going cross-generation, and they must get it right. So I want to hear your thoughts in the comment section. Talk to me. I'll be responding, to the comments. I'm really excited about the game, but to be very honest, I'm happy that it's getting another delay to make sure things are done, because it would be better if I was going to cover content on Cyberpunk 2077 that we're actually covering the content rather than the bugs. This is something that has plagued the Division coverage. It's plagued the entire game. It's made the game become basically a laughing stock among those that have felt dissatisfied, and it's not necessarily that they're wrong. It's just that the game came out in an unoptimized fashion on one platform, which happened to have a lot of the player base, and hence this is exactly the result of what happens when you don't optimize your game. And I understand that game development is also very, very challenging, but I have to still say the Division development team and leadership mainly deserves that criticism. But the developers themselves, I say that I want to give them a thumbs up, because they've created a very complex game and they were able to ship the game even in the face of all the struggles. I understand, yes, it's a very weird situation, but this is basically my stance. Peace.